Today's topic is going to be a bit controversial, but what really annoys me a little bit is that it doesn't have to be controversial. It seems like something that is so obvious, and I get really surprised how this topic makes people a little bit aggressive, and
Just a
also
little.
just a little, and how people get like, you know they start becoming divisive. This topic divides people. It's one of
Oh
those
yeah,
topics
sure.
that people lose their cool, let's say. So
Oh
I
yeah.
am really happy that we're going to cover it. And I think the problem is it's so important. It's such an important topic, and it really does directly affect us. It's not one of those topics like remotely, oh, here something is happening. It directly affects us. And I'm really happy that we finally get to talk about it. But before we get started, I wanted to know, like, how did you get into this topic? What do you do? What are your qualifications? And how did you end up researching this topic?
Um, so this happened a long, long time ago. Now it's like 30 years, a long time ago. And I had young kids, and I was listening to various health programs because I was trying to improve my health. Because earlier I had bad health, and so I started listening to health programs, and I vastly improved my health. But that's even a longer story. But anyway, so I'm listening to these radio programs. I'm listening to like Gary Null. You ever hear of him out of New York City? Um, he was on the air quite a long time. So I'm listening to him, various health programs, and every once in a while he would bring up topics on vaccines. Most of the time was neurological damage or some kind of autism, that type of thing. And so at the time, I had no knowledge about this stuff. So my background is engineering. So I'm a computer programmer, plus I know all the physics and civil engineering and all these types of things because I went to that type of school. So I'm a very kind of logical kind of person. So I like to look for evidence, right? So I'm listening to these programs, and so they're talking about autism, and I have young kids, so I'm like, oh, that seems like I should probably know something more about it. So I picked up a few books, and at the time, I thought vaccines were the greatest thing ever because they cured all these diseases, and we don't have to worry about measles and whooping cough and those types of things because they invented vaccines, right? So this is my thinking. I think this is a very common thing. So I started out very essentially pro-vaccine, and I don't know how I knew that. It's kind of like almost a societal consciousness. Anyway, so I'm going through these books, and I became more disturbed by various things I read about neurological damage, and I thought it's still a risk, but overall it's still a good idea. And then I'm reading this small book by Neil Miller, and he had a chart in there that showed a decline in deaths from measles by 95% before there was a vaccine. It's kind of a little sketch of a chart. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking this cannot be true because I had in my mind that there was once measles, they came out with a vaccine, and then all the deaths just like plummeted to zero or close to zero. Because this is the idea I had, right? So I understand when people say how important vaccines are because that's the way I used to think, right? So I took the book and I said, "This guy is crazy," and threw the book on a coffee table and said, "Forget about that. That guy's a lunatic." But it's bothered me, so I went to a local library after a few days, and I went through these little almanacs they have at a local library, and on the third one, I found death rates from various diseases, and it was measles every 10 years. Boom, 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 boom. And I had a piece of graph paper with me and my clipboard, so now you know it's really old. And so I plotted those points. There's like 6 or 7 points because it's only every 10 years. And I plotted it, and it showed basically the same thing. It was the same basic chart. And I thought, huh. And I just sat there for a long time because I felt like something that I knew was 100% true was just suddenly destroyed. And I thought, yeah, how could that be? I mean, what gives here, right? And then, because I was very desperate to keep my belief system, I said, maybe the almanac is wrong. The almanac could be wrong. Maybe there's something's wrong with that because I know I'm not misinterpreting the information. So I ended up going to a local medical library after a few days or weeks, and I went into this place called in New Haven, Yale Medical. And I just went in and said, oh, can I use your medical library? I'm doing some research. It was like, okay. I said, okay. I filled out a little form, went in there. Had no idea what I was going to look for. But I went into a rotunda and they had all these reference books. And one of them was US Vital Statistics. And they were the big olive green books. So I went in and said, well, the data is probably here. I'm a kind of a data guy. I'm, engineer, data driven, right? So I was able to find the first, because it went from like 1900 onward. So like in 1904 or whatever it was, I found the first set of data, mortality data for measles, whooping cough, scarlet fever, tuberculosis, those types of things. So I said, oh, okay, here's the data. I couldn't find it all in one spot. So I had to photocopy this particular page, and then I found the next one in like 1915, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I had a whole series of things I looked at. Until I had enough, I went back home and I put them in my spreadsheet and I was missing some data. So I had to come back and I did it again, filled in the gaps. I went back and I did my first chart. And my first chart showed measles deaths going up, down, 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 and hit close to zero in 1963. And when I looked at it from the peak to that point in 1963, that's when they first came out with the first measles vaccine, deaths were down 98%. So I was just blown away. So I thought, what did I do wrong? Because I didn't want to let go. I really didn't want to let go. And so I went through the data sheets over and over again, triple checked, quadruple checked. It's like, there's no mistake. Okay. So I checked everything I could think of and I still didn't want to believe it. I also did the same thing for whooping cough and scarlet fever and these types of things, right? And I just became obsessed with the data. It's like, well, okay, the same thing happened for whooping cough. That was down over 90% before there was a vaccine in the 40s. And I was able to eventually get data from England because I was looking around. I made some connections. Some guy sent me a CD. And then I did the historical searching to find the data before 1900. So the US started gathering statistics in 1900. So you have 1900 on, but the UK was way ahead of the world, the Western world. They started gathering statistics in 1838. So you had a whole bunch more data. So I got a lot of that data and I charted that. And there you see even a more dramatic decline in mortality. So in the case of measles, you're down almost 100% before 1968 when they started national vaccination program. Same thing with the whooping cough, down almost 100% before they started vaccinating at the national level in 1957.
So US started measles vaccines before UK.
Correct. Mm-hmm. They started with this thing called the killed measles virus that they said is 100% effective. It's great, no side effects. And they started vaccinating and they immediately found serious problems. Something called atypical measles, which was worse than measles. So they had to step back. They didn't tell the public, but they stepped back, and reformulated it, and came up with the 1967 vaccine that was not this killed as a lot, supposed live virus, right? So it was a different vaccine. Same name. It's still called a vaccine, but the first one was not very good. So they got rid of that one, replaced it. And then the UK came on board in 1968. But what's critical is this disease was down 100% or 99.9 something percent before there was a vaccine. The data shows this. And when you start looking at data from different states like New York and Massachusetts, same thing. All these diseases went down by almost 100% before there was a vaccine. You can also look at France. You can look at different countries. It's always the same pattern. And what's even more stunning is, equally stunning is there's other diseases like scarlet fever and tuberculosis, both of those which were bigger killers in the 1800s. Those dropped to zero without any real national vaccine program. At least in the United States, there's no tuberculosis vaccine. And scarlet fever went to zero with no vaccine at all. And in fact, when you look at every infectious disease, enteric fever, typhoid, typhus, including all the other ones, they all dropped by 100% before there was a vaccine. So what does that tell? Well, this is what told me. I was like, well, there must be some common factor why they all declined with or without a vaccine and before antibiotics. Antibiotics, mass production of penicillin didn't happen until 1944. And a lot of the other things that they did ahead of time were very ineffective. So it had to be something else that caused the decline, and it wasn't vaccines and it wasn't antibiotics. So this is how I started
Oh, okay.
with
Wow.
I was just curious, and then I found a chart, found the next chart, built upon the data, and then I had to accept the data eventually. So and there I was trying to answer the question, well, what did cause the decline if it wasn't vaccines, and why do we think it's the vaccines?
So how
So
long
the
have you
data is hardcore. I mean, anybody can take the data, and I encourage people to take the charts, look up the data. Now it's easier. You can go on the internet and find a lot of these PDFs online. Make your own charts and draw your own conclusions.
So we had a little technical glitch, but we're back again. What I was gonna say is what you mentioned that you had this societal consciousness. I think that's what you said, and how you were trying to find and prove that those charts were wrong, which I think is very
Right, right,
interesting.
right. Yeah,
And
I
I think
was. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, I think this is very interesting because I did not have that kind of I want to say like programming because I think you are because I never grew up with that kind of understanding that vaccines save lives. I mean, I was vaccinated. We knew what vaccines are, we knew what they do, but we never had this like a strong belief system, like very strong, where if somebody would have said, oh, vaccines are harmful, or they came up with it after the disease was already in decline, I would never have that kind of
Mhm.
like a strong resistance to accept the fact. And I think I've noticed this mainly in Europe and in the States. I think there's something maybe in schools, maybe in just
Right.
society, in the
Uh,
society,
yeah.
they're doing something. Very interested, like what exactly, like
Maybe they
where
put
exactly.
maybe they put LSD in the water.
Mhm.
I really don't know. So when this happened, and I thought about it, I thought, well, why do I think that? And I couldn't pinpoint. Like we didn't have a school where they said vaccines, yay, or anything like that, or there just wasn't. I don't recall anything. But there must have been some programs or some kind of just societal consciousness. I don't
It's
know.
very subtle. I think propaganda is very subtle. Like I
Yeah.
know
So
cases where I wasn't even watching TV, I wasn't even paying attention, but it worked. The propaganda would like even like remotely when you hear here and there, somehow it gets into and it works.
yeah.
But yeah, what I wanted to ask you is, since you have been digging into this history and researching the past pandemics like cholera, chicken pox, I think measles, and all these vaccine, and plus the vaccinations. What I really thought was, what I feel really curious. What were your thoughts when COVID started? Because for you, probably you knew in advance, like you knew what's gonna happen, didn't you?
So I had just lost my wife, and so I was very distressed. I was very
Mm.
depressed. So I was fighting with that, and then COVID came along, and so I was like, so I was like, I thought it would blow over. I thought there's no logical reason for this, right? So I thought, well, it's just a bit of hysteria. It will blow over. And then it kept going, and then there was more hysteria and more panic, and you know how it all went. And I just kind of rolled my eyes and went about my day as much best as I could because people were panicking. And this over the various months, I decided, well, I'm just going to live my life just as I want. I would go out and travel. around the state or visit my sister or whatever. And I also saw a need that there was a lot of homeless people that were thrown out of shelters. So I would go to a local city and help homeless people out because they didn't care about this COVID stuff. They just wanted food and shelter. So we would get some food and I would sit with them and we would talk, that type of thing. And, would give them a hug or, touch their hand or something because I wasn't afraid or anything. They weren't afraid. And everyone was fine. No one died that I know. I didn't die. So this death plague was not killing very poorly nourished people. These were not healthy people. They were very sickly. One lady had only one leg and most of her teeth gone, and she was around 50. Um, very distressed lady, horrible diet, but she just had a bad hand dealt to her in life. And she got her leg smashed off, and when she was in her 30s, and everything spiraled out of control with pain medications and things like that. So I felt really bad for her and all these other people. So I went about my day and I helped these people, and they were fine. I was fine. I didn't get sick. Nobody I know got sick, and which I wasn't surprised because there has never been a disease that really killed people like this. So I rapidly knew that the initial panic got people more killed than anything else because I knew people that were terrified. They were terrified. They ran to the hospitals, and of course they would just do whatever treatments that they thought was best and put them on ventilators. And I've heard plenty of stories where people were just basically terrified and they ended up on a ventilator and they ended up dead. So, you know, I just thought the whole thing was just beyond crazy. I didn't think that would ever really happen again, but there you go. Because they had a panic like that in the I think it was the 70s with the a particular type of flu. It was a swine flu.
Swine flu? Yeah, I
Yeah,
was gonna mention that because
yeah, and
I
they
thought that
they panicked. They vaccinated like 40 million people or so, and nothing ever happened except people were injured by the vaccine with Guillain-Barré syndrome, and some people were either killed or damaged for life. And there was a big whoop-de-doo about it, but then everybody forgot about it, got memory hold. But anyway, I just didn't care. I just ignored it all. Um, I
so
went to
you
visit
didn't
my,
trust the science?
huh?
You didn't trust the science?
I trust the data, not the talking heads on TV. Da, 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 da. I certainly don't trust politicians anymore at all. They just go out there and say blah 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 blah. Who cares what they say? I don't pay attention to them. They're just actors. Anyway, so I went to visit my sister 2 hours away, which was great because I went out and it's like I'm driving along. There's like nobody out. It's like, oh, is everyone dead? It's apocalypse. There was nobody on the road. I was all by myself. It was great. Or I went to visit somebody in the Cape, which was like 4 hour drive, and they had flashing signs: you must quarantine, whatever. And I went there, and we had a nice time. And I came back, and everything. It was the whole thing was to me was absurd. But I understand how people got suckered in because they didn't have the knowledge base that I had, knowing that vaccines and antibiotics didn't stop these illnesses. And I think what's really important, because the disease rates plummeted to near zero or zero without any vaccine, it tells you something, that there was other factors that were much more important than any vaccine or any antibiotics. And this whole idea that there's this microbe that comes along and kills you is impossible, right? There has to be all these other factors that are much more important. And when you look at the history back in the 1800s and early 1900s, more in the 1800s, they lived the poor lived in horrible conditions. There was no sanitation. So you went to the bathroom, you went out the window, went into your water supply, and you were drinking from a communal toilet. Plus, the industrial waste would go into your water supply too. So you're drinking from an industrial toilet. Your food was diseased because there's no refrigeration. So either you got it really fresh if you were on the farm, otherwise it just hung around, and it would get flies on it, and it was diseased food. And so people are eating and drinking this horrible concoction. and they were living in very polluted environment from the atmosphere, because the only way you heated things and did anything was with coal, and that would go up into the atmosphere and sometimes come back down. And that was particularly bad in the big cities like London. That's what the London fog really was. It wasn't like a nice little fog drifting in from water vapor. It was air pollution. And sometimes it was really, really bad. So, of course, that's going to impact your whole immune system. It's going to damage your lungs. You're not going to get a lot of sunshine. And they were dressed in a particular way where they didn't expose anything. So their vitamin D levels were probably near zero. Their vitamin C levels were probably close to zero. Vitamin A levels were horrible. So they were just, ripe for anything to make them sick. And then they would die, and they would label it with either scarlet fever or measles, whooping cough, et cetera, et cetera. They also had horrible labor. So people were working 12, 14, 16, 18 hours a day, horrible, horrible work. In the mid 1800s, there was hundreds of thousands of miserable poor living in the east of London. But in the west of London, that's where the rich people lived. So that's where you saw the people with parasols and top hats, right? So the labor was intense, and it was sometimes seasonal. So many women turned to prostitution to try to survive. And they had children working in mines and factories as young as 4 years old. So, how is anybody going to grow up working in a factory, drinking industrial toilet water, eating horrible food? How could you possibly grow up to be anything except sickly? So if you got some kind of condition and you had some breakouts on your skin, you could rapidly just die because there's nothing anybody could do. And the things that they did do, there was this horrible medical ideas. One of the most pervasive was bleeding. They would bleed people for everything. So if you were getting some kind of treatment, they would bleed you for it, right? So they killed the first president of the United States, George Washington. They bled him to death. They would also use toxic medications like mercury and arsenic and strychnine, something that nobody would in their right mind would just purposely put in their mouth now. But these were common, just standard medications. So somebody would be taking, they would get sick, they would bleed them, they would give them some calomel, which was a form of mercury. And the idea was to purge out your entire digestive system, which it did quite well. But you're taking a mercury-based medication, right? So it wasn't really helping anybody. And then they would use something called a hot regimen. So the idea was they put you in a room, cover you with blankets, deprive you of all water and fresh air, and heat you up. And their idea was, well, you have a fever, so we're going to heat up and sweat out the disease. But unfortunately, that's not how the human body really works. So you would die from the actual treatment. So you had these bad environment to live in and these horrible medical treatments. And then what happened is starting around 1850s, 1860s, 1870s really took off. We had the big health revolution. They called it sanitation revolution, where they started getting rid of these slum dwellings. That's another thing. You lived in slums. Sometimes you lived in a basement where there was just vermin and refuse and just horrible conditions. And you're working and all the other stuff we just talked about. So they started cleaning those up. You started having piped water. Then you started cleaning up the streets because those were filled with animal dung, because how do you transport anything with horses, right? So they started cleaning that up. So they had this big, huge health revolution, really. So by the time you got into the early 1900s, now we start getting in electricity. And so now you have first the ice box and then refrigeration. Wow, big innovation, right? You've cleaned up the water supply. You improved transportation. So now you don't have horses pooping and peeing in the streets. And now you have the flush toilet and all these other great engineering innovations, big waterwork projects. And then what you see is the people's health improved. And over the decades, very slowly over decades, by the time you hit 1940, 1950, 1960, it wasn't a problem. And you can read in the medical literature that they said, well, the infectious disease has hit another low this year. We don't really have to worry. They're not even part of they're not a significant part of the mortality statistics. So measles, whooping cough, we don't have to worry about those anymore. Scarlet fever, just it just wasn't important anymore. So over about 100 years, the world transformed by the world's greatest health revolution that we forgot about.
Interesting. So then it is because so the conditions were causing these pandemics. Um,
But what's important is we have a definition of disease as this microbe, whatever it is, right? Like say whooping cough, it's Bordetella pertussis, right? We have this idea that this comes along and that's how you get sick. End of
yeah,
story, right?
yeah.
But it doesn't work that way.
Really? How
It
does it? How?
depends. Well, there could be, let's say, this Bordetella pertussis, right? You inhale it, and this bacteria gets in your lungs and multiplies, right? But if you're a healthy person, nothing much happens. So they did studies, 500 consecutive cases of whooping cough, which is defined by having this bacteria, and they were all just basically either you didn't have any symptoms or they were very mild. Because what's critical is your overall health profile. That's what is really important. So it's not about just a microbe, it's a microbe, potentially a microbe, and your overall health profile. If you're basically healthy, these things are not much of a threat.
Hmm. So
And I think that's the lesson we failed to learn in history. Because if we did that, we wouldn't be trying to protect us from each and every microbe. We would say, hey, how can we make you the healthiest person possible? Then you don't have to worry about any microbes.
how about rotavirus?
I don't have any data on that, but rotavirus wasn't. It's not even in any statistics that I ever saw before 1970. I don't know when that came on the scene.
Because I think that one, even if you're healthy, I think if you get that, you get just diarrhea, and then you just it's very dangerous. I think that one.
Well, I don't know. I mean, cholera used there was six major cholera pandemics from basically the early 1800s into the 1900s. But by the time we put in the proper systems for sewage and all that, no more cholera in the Western world, right? It just
Yeah.
disappeared.
So cholera is a what is it? Is it a virus or is it a bacteria?
It's supposedly a bacteria, but again, if so, it's a hard thing to like really grasp because it took me a
Yeah.
long time to figure this out, right? So let's go back to the whooping cough. So this bacteria somehow spreads, right? You cough and it spreads, right? You inhale this bacteria, right? If you're healthy, it's no big deal. It's not
Mhm.
you're like gonna. So I used to have this image: if you got whooping cough, you cough and maybe cough to death, right? That happened in the 1800s and early 1900s. By the middle of the 1900s, this did not happen.
Mhm.
So what changed? Did the
Mhm.
bacteria get like weaker? This is kind of like a common thing that the microbe got weaker, but they all became less dangerous over that 100 years. So so in
So
1940, 1950, 1960, when you got a bacteria, it was no big deal. It just wasn't an issue unless you were malnourished. That's why I'm
so
saying
the
it's not just about a microbe. It's what's
about
much more important is your overall health.
so our oral health got better because of better sanitation and because of better living conditions and maybe
Right.
even nutrition. And then but do you think at the same time those microbes kind of mutated into like less dangerous
I,
versions
I
or
I very much doubt that because every disease at the same time got weaker or
oh,
less virulent. All right. So if you got measles in 1960, no big deal. Whooping cough, 1960, no big deal. Scarlet fever, no big deal. But in 1800s, they were all big deals. So
yeah,
they all changed at the same time. There's no way they all mutated somehow at the same time.
right.
At least
But the
that's the way I
virus
look at it.
but viruses, they do affect healthy people, right? So bacteria, okay, you need to be
Well,
healthy.
it
But
depends
if
on what you mean by effect, right?
but like you get really sick.
Well, some people do, or so people don't.
Oh,
But what I usually look at is the mortality statistics, right? And the only one that was left by the 1970s was the flu. That had fallen 90%, right? So, but everything else had fallen by 100%. So, again, it's not, when you look at the charts, you look at the data, it's just not,
maybe
nothing that serious.
let's look at those graphs actually.
Oh, okay. Sure. Sounds good. All right.
Mm.
So this is the first US data that I charted. Actually, the first thing I charted was those green lines at the bottom. That's the measles deaths. So you can see that, which we didn't type, I don't think I mentioned, typhoid and diphtheria. They were the bigger killers. At the bottom is scarlet fever, whooping cough, and measles. So from 1900, it just got better and better and better and better and better until you got to the middle of the century. So you're in the 1940s and 50s. The death rate had plummeted close to zero, and it kept on going down and down. So you take scarlet fever, which was still killing people in the 1940s, right? Now it's at zero. There's no vaccine for scarlet fever, right? Uh, and typhoid. Again, typhoid was a pretty big killer. It's the kind of darkish line. It starts at 30 and goes down. No one dies from typhoid because we don't worry about that either. And then we have the other ones, whooping cough and measles, which were smaller killers than the other two. That just went down, down, down. And you can see that penicillin wasn't introduced in 1944 in mass production. Streptomycin, that's another antibiotic, 1947, and whooping cough vaccines, late 40s. And you can see way at the far right is measles vaccine, 1963, when
It's
that's
like
where we had almost 100% decline.
no, it looks like almost like zero when they introduced the measles vaccine.
Right. Well, it's not really zero. It's
Yeah,
close
but
to zero. It's like
mhm.
0.2 per 100,000. So if you look at measles, let's see, do I have that? Let's see.
But look, when they did, I'm sure they had this data, right?
Oh,
Those
yeah.
who, but, I mean, they looked at the data and they can see. I mean, it took several years to come up with the fact. I mean, I don't know actually how long it takes, but I'm assuming they started quite early. Even if they started in 1950s, after 13 years, if they introduced the vaccine, I mean, they already had like for such a long time decline. So they came up with I mean, assuming they saw this data, they started working on it, seeing that there is a big decline, right? That's what we
Um,
can assume.
yeah, but there's a little bit more history to that. So
Okay.
the first vaccine, which is where we get the name vaca, which is cow, started in 1798. And then it was pushed forward for the next 100 years or so for the smallpox, even though if it didn't really work. But this whole idea of vaccination became a very embedded idea. So when you hit the end of the 1800s, smallpox became a mild disease, just like every other disease. They kept on this idea that we need to vaccinate, we need to vaccinate, we need to vaccinate. And despite many doctors saying, well, this is a bad idea and the injuries and that type of thing we can go over, the idea to protect you from the microbe was very embedded. So by the early 1900s, they thought, by 1920s, really, they decided, well, we need vaccines for other things. And so they started developing these other ideas for particularly like whooping cough. And so they started playing around with this idea to protect you from whooping cough. They came up with vaccines for scarlet fever, which were a disaster. And so they started creating these ideas. So they would have been maybe not really cognizant of the decline by the 1920s, even though it had started, right? But I don't think it dawned on almost anybody that this had happened. They were so embedded in the idea that we're going to protect you from these diseases, and if we do a good enough job, these diseases will just go away. And so I think they just became a victim of their own ideology.
Uh-huh. So they were not just ignoring this data, they just didn't even pay attention, didn't see it at
Well, I
all.
can't say that nobody saw this data.
Yeah.
By the 1960s, there was in the U.S. Vital Statistics, there was a report that showed these charts that somebody had hand drawn, right? So they
Oh,
had data that they showed. Might even be in this presentation. I'm not sure. I'd have to go look. But anyway, so they had these things in the 1960s, these charts showing measles going down towards zero, every infectious disease going down to zero. But it didn't really trump the idea that this is what we're going to do because it's been around for so long. And before the actual original vaccine, there was inoculation, which was taking pus from somebody who had smallpox and scratching it onto your arm. And they thought that was a great idea. And that was for 80 years before they started doing vaccination. So this whole contagion slash vaccination idea has been around a long time, and it's hard to let go ideologically. And then, of course, you're making money. You start making money off of these things, which they did right out of the, from the beginning. Medical men would make money from inoculation. Medical men made a lot of money from vaccination. And so there was a real big push to say, hey, let's keep on doing this for other diseases. So it continued. So yeah, it might take them years and years of development, but once you're embedded in the ideology, you don't want to really let it go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I'm also thinking, is it possible that maybe people were still getting sick with measles, but not dying? However, maybe it had implications. Maybe there were some kind of
Sure.
like adverse health events that they wanted to prevent with vaccines.
Well, let's take the measles vaccine. So 1963. So they wanted to. Their idea was they were going to somehow interrupt transmission and get rid of measles once and for all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was an idea. So that was in 1963. They thought, well, the first vaccine was a disaster. So they ended up with a lot of atypical measles, like 600 to 900,000 people ended up with that. But so they switched to the live virus, and their idea is by 1967 they would just eradicate measles. Well, that didn't work. They just had to keep trying, and they said one shot and you're protected for life. That didn't turn out. They have to always keep on tweaking it up and tweaking it up, right? But the idea is like if we get rid of measles, that's just going to be great because now we wouldn't have to worry about it. But again, by that point, almost nobody was dying from measles. In 1962, the year before, in New England, I think there was like a dozen deaths from measles out of five or six New England states, six New England states. Then you could say, well, if they don't get measles, they won't get complications of pneumonia, things like that. But why are you getting pneumonia? It turns out if you have to take a look at your vitamin A levels, vitamin D levels, and then suddenly those things start going away. For example, there was a study in, well, I can't remember the exact journal, where they looked at the vitamin D levels of people for secondary infections in hospitals. The people with optimal vitamin D levels were 95% less likely to get a secondary infection in hospital. So they for a long time have tended not to look at the health of the person. They always look at the microbe.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think people's intent, which is kind of distorted by profits, isn't necessarily the best solution. But you
Right.
can get caught up in it, right? So you
Mm.
think, oh, I'm doing a great job. I don't think there's too many malicious people like thinking of things to, do the wrong thing. I'm sure
Yeah,
there are
but I
some,
think
but
it takes one or two malicious people and a lot of not gullible, but a lot of people who are busy with their lives and trust someone else's expertise. And
yeah,
then
I'm
that,
talking about the people who are actually developing these things, right? Of course, there weren't a lot of people doing this. There was a very select group of people, but they had attained through a couple centuries of this status in society that you're the very smart people, you're the
yeah.
doctors, you're the scientists. So of course you're going to do the right thing, right? And this idea of vaccination around basically 200 years or so, um, by the middle of the 1900s was very powerful. So why would you question it?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
but again, by the 1950s and 1960s, you could look at the data and go, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. But they still can't get, you still can't let it go. And so the idea still persists for, like, let's say the flu vaccination, right? But if we get the charts later, we see that the flu vaccine hasn't prevented deaths. It's basically the same level as it was when they started vaccinating in the 1970s and 80s.
Do you have the graph for that as well? For the
Yeah,
flu?
yeah, it might be a little farther up. So, um, what's the best way to get there? I don't know. Oh, great. Let's see if it works this way. Okay. Oh, well, just quickly, this is the data from England. So you see it starts in 1838. You see massive amounts of deaths in the 1800s, and you see it go down, down, down. And then you can see the same interventions, mass production of penicillin, streptomycin. This happened way down the road, right?
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I know, it's shocking, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
Oh, by the way, here's all the references, so you
Yeah.
can go look them up yourself. I try to
Yeah,
provide the
everybody
references
can
all over
go
the
and look.
place.
Yeah, because I think a
Yeah.
lot of people are gonna have the same kind of like resistance. So it's
Oh, yeah.
very good to go
Same
and do it yourself. Yeah.
same resistance I had.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, let's see if we can just skip ahead to. Okay, so yeah, so okay, here's the influenza and pneumonia. They lumped them together, right? So by the time they started vaccinating in the late 1970s, the death rate is down 90%. Okay, so it's still a problem, right? But it's down 90%. And what's interesting is no one seemed to say, well, why did it drop 90%? There was never, I looked through the literature, I could never find anybody say, had looked into that. Because if they had looked into it, they might have said, well, okay, vitamin D levels have improved, so maybe we should look at vitamin D, or these types of things. But no one has done that really. Maybe there has been, but I never found anything like that, right? So I don't know, my keyboard doesn't work, but so they began vaccinating in the 70s, and you can see that dotted blue line going up. So that's in the 65 plus year and olders. That's where they keep track of the statistics. And so you had, by the 1990s, we've reached 70% vaccination coverage, right? And you can see the brown line, the death rate goes up and then it comes back down. So with the two red circles, that's the base death rate, right? So it's around in the 20s when they started, and it's now in the 20s when they ended. The
Wow.
death rate hasn't changed much. As a
What
matter of fact,
happened?
it hasn't influenced death rate. So
Okay.
if we go back to the other chart, so you can see here, it's kind of low here, and it kind of just basically flatlines
Uh-huh.
relative to the entire chart. Right? But here you can, when we're magnified and view in, you can see it went down into the 1960s, 1970s. So then it goes up, the death rate increases, and then comes back down. So by the time you're done, it's basically at the same level.
Oh. Wait, what caused this peak, do you think?
That it went up.
Yeah, why did it went up and go back again?
I don't know. I wouldn't know. The main thrust is there's been no. If vaccination was really great, this line here would have continued down towards zero, but instead it's basically flatlined.
Yeah. But
Keep in mind
COVID is
this
the
this
same,
scale
isn't
is,
it?
well, I don't have the COVID in here. This ends in 2017, but so this range is very tight, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
going from like 23 up to 38, 23 to 33, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
a very narrow range. It's not that different,
Yeah.
but it didn't cause the number to fall towards zero, right?
Mm-hmm.
And actually, so this was a article in Cell and Host Microbe in 2023, and Fauci, everyone knows who Fauci is, right? Was the third lead author on this. And what they're saying here, and we can read that if you want out loud, after 60 years of doing vaccination for influenza, it hasn't worked because the mortality rates have not changed. So the chart I just showed you, they're admitting in their text here that we haven't really developed a vaccine that controls the death rate for flu.
But what I'm reading is very little improvement in vaccine prevention of infection has been noted.
Right.
So it means that their vaccines over the 60 years, people have been getting these seasonal flu shots every
Right.
year.
Yep.
Um, and then the very little, I'm assuming very little is almost none, improvement in prevention of this
Right.
infection. So why are we like this is written in 2022? I am pretty sure I've been hearing it how people go and get their flu vaccines, even pregnant women, they go
Yeah.
get their flu, seasonal flu, like, oh, it's time to go to get your flu.
Right.
All the while, it's like, why are doctors not aware of this? Like, what?
Well,
I'm
well,
so confused.
because nobody reads these journals. This is like an inside journal that people talk about this stuff. Your average doctor does not go, as far as I've been told, go and read all these journals. They don't have time. They have patients. They have a life. They simply like do what the government and the higher ups say. Well, this is what we're going to do, and no one wants to go and say, well, it hasn't worked for 60 years. Maybe we should stop. So no one's going to stop it. It's a big industry.
Because it's money, right? Because it's like
Well,
everybody.
it's money, and it's also we've been saying to do this for 60 years. Who's going to say, well, maybe that wasn't such a great idea? Even in the present administration, they're telling people to still get their flu vaccine.
No, but look, if this is something that I have no, and 60 years, it's 6 decades, somebody would have been like, hey, it's not really working, so we're gonna stop doing it. I'm sure there are a lot of things that many different projects, maybe even medical, they were like, okay, so this is not working, we're just gonna stop doing it, and that's it.
Yeah,
That's basically it. But
you would
there's
think, right?
some
That's
kind of
not
incentive.
that's not what
There's
happens. Vaccines have a special category of magic. So once you have a vaccine, you will never let go of it because it's safe and effective. And that safe and effective idea started 200 years ago. Dr. Jenner wrote about that. He said, "Oh, I have this great new idea. It's perfectly safe and it will protect you for life, safe and effective." And they've been using the same mantra for a long, long time. It's an automatic. So if for most people, if you say vaccine, the first thing they think of is safe and effective. I don't know if you do, but most people do. If you ask them what's a vaccine, what's safe and effective? So this mantra has been like so embedded into your consciousness, you don't even have to question it. That's why people didn't question. A lot of people didn't question the COVID stuff. They're like, oh, there's a vaccine, must be safe and effective, right?
right, but it was not a vaccine, right? And it
Well, so vaccine is just a category of something we're going to put in your body. The original vaccine was not an injection. They didn't have that technology. What they would do is roll up your sleeve, cut you numerous times with a lancet, which was a sharp metal knife, right? They would cut you, and then they would take pus from maybe somebody else's wound and smear it into your
Oh, okay. So
arm,
that you would
right?
get a small dosage of it.
Well, it
Yeah.
depends on how deep you cut. Sometimes you would get
Yeah.
blood, and sometimes you wouldn't, right? Um, get that out of the way. So yeah, so that was the original vaccine. Of course, no one would do that today because you would say, well, I'm probably going to get sepsis, which people did, and they got very sick. Oftentimes, sometimes they would die from the procedure, or you end up with tuberculosis, or a whole host of other conditions. As you might imagine, if I took pus from, what they did is they did arm to arm vaccination for 100 years. So they took something from some animal, a cow or a goat or a horse, because Jenner thought it came from a horse. It wasn't. He didn't think it came from a cow. So anyway, they would take this pus mixture and they would put it on somebody's arm, and then they would take that guy's stuff that developed there and put it on the next person, and the next person, the next person, next person. Arm to arm vaccination. So
But
you can
this,
imagine if I took pus from your arm, I know you're a very lovely lady, but if I took pus from your arm and smeared it into my arm, it's probably not going to, do you too well. You're probably going to end up with some kind of sickness from just doing that.
right.
But this was
But
the idea.
the idea of vaccines, which is creating an antibody so that your body, when it you get next time the virus or the bacteria, that it already has antibodies, right? That's the
Right.
classical term of
Right,
vaccines.
right. Before that, it was simply, we're going to make you sick and protect you from the next sickness, because they didn't have that concept of antibodies, right? So the
Hmm.
idea was, we're going to give you smallpox, which was inoculation in a controlled setting, so that you don't get smallpox again. We're going to then later on is we're going to give you this other thing that was supposed to be safer. We're going to give you cowpox or horsepox or goat pox, which will make you sick, because you were supposed to get sick. You were going to get sick, and then you wouldn't get the smallpox, right? That was the idea. It didn't work, because you would often get smallpox anyway, right? And as a matter of fact, the original vaccine that Jenner came up with, he said, well, it's safe and it will protect you for life. Well, after a couple of decades, they realized that didn't work. So they came up with the idea of revaccination. It's like, oh, well, okay. Instead of saying, well, this idea didn't work, they go, well, we just need to revaccinate. And so they started this revaccination idea, which was sometimes once every 10 years, sometimes it was every 3 years, sometimes it was every year. They just kind of made it up based on their own belief systems. I know, sounds
but,
crazy, doesn't it?
but there must be some vaccines that actually do help, like tetanus, for example, um or what other, I'm sure there are like other vaccines that would, for example, when you travel to certain countries, do you need to get vaccinations? I mean, there should be ones that work, right?
Well, maybe there are. I mean, maybe they do something, but again, I'm asking people to think that it's not about the microbe; it's about your health, right? And it's a hard pill to swallow. It took me a long time. And if when you mention like tetanus or yellow fever or something like that, right? Yellow fever used to kill people in the United States too, and that went to zero without any vaccine, right? So why, the question you have to ask yourself is, why did that happen, right? And keep in mind, there's no mortality from tetanus or some of these other diseases that we now, like chickenpox. Nobody died from chickenpox. If it was very tiny. It didn't end up in the mortality statistics. A lot of things didn't weren't in mortality statistics, so they're very minor causes of any kind of mortality. And should we really be mandating these types of things on some kind of idea that, well, yeah, some people died? There's not really a lot of hardcore data on this kind of stuff. But then they'll say, well, the incidence went down, right? Well, maybe it did, but how do you measure incidence, right? So if you have measles, sometimes you didn't even know. Maybe you had a little fever, right? So by the 1960s, so you you could say, well, in the 1920s, a lot of people had measles, but by the 1960s, it went down. But again, it wasn't the same kind of disease, because you weren't really sick. It was not a big deal. And then you had people like Dr. Klenner and other scientists said, well, if we just give you vitamin A, no problem. If we
Mm-hmm.
and Dr. Klenner, he used vitamin C for like everything. So he would
Mm-hmm.
give you vitamin C, measles, no problem, polio, no problem, whooping cough, no problem, because he was probably inadvertently helping the immune system take care of these problems. Instead of like trying to protect you from the microbe, you're helping the immune system.
Yeah. And the thing that really worries me now is how, with the COVID, what happened with the COVID, right? When we first had the pandemic, I didn't even think that they're going to come up with vaccines. It just didn't even occur to me that that's going to be the next thing that they're going to do. But then I
Yeah,
would probably should have, if I studied the swine flu case, what they did
yeah,
with the
yeah.
swine flu, I'd be like, oh, okay, I know what they're going to do this time.
Right.
But again, I encourage the listeners to go and check that thing with what happened with the swine flu, the vaccines.
Yeah, I have an article on my Substack about that. It might be,
Mm.
so you can look
It's
me up on
kind of like
Substack.
the first first kind of like a case, right? It reminded me so much of COVID. I mean, if they did, it was like similar scenario
Right.
that.
So they had a case in a particular fort where somebody appeared to have died right after, and they determined, oh no, this is a flu. and they kind of went into panic mode. So they decided, well, let's just vaccinate the entire population. And so they went about doing that, but there was no evidence that it was spreading anywhere or other people were being sick or anything. But they just did it anyway. So I think it was 40 million or so people got vaccinated. But there was people who said, no, I'm not going to do that. Back then it was more okay to say, no, I'm not doing that. Right. But they still have 40 million people, and then a lot of people were injured or killed. They always make everything sound like it's perfectly safe, and there's no so-called side effects. But that's never been the case. There's always a problem. So you're always taking a chance. And does it really work? Probably not. Most of the time, it doesn't seem to work very well at all. And
Yes.
and and you always have to keep in mind the initial promises are always 100% safe, 100% effective. That's the original vaccine was safe and effective, right? Measles, 1963, 100% safe, 100% effective. Oops, never mind. 1967, 100% safe, 100% effective. Oops, no, we need more vaccine. We have to do a second vaccine because the first one didn't cover everything. So it's always a creeping, hey, it didn't really work, but we're going to just change the goalposts, right? We're going to just add another thing to it. Like a really good example is DTP. So it's diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. Pertussis is whooping cough. So it's really the P part that we're interested in, whooping cough, right? So by the time they came out with this, again, we have a mortality decline of 90% based on US data, 100% based on UK data. So it wasn't really a big issue. But anyway, so they started vaccinating with DTP, and people would end up with neurological damage right out of 1940s, 1950s literature. So they ended up with some kind of neurological damage. And so this was kind of debated on for decades. Does it cause neurological damage? Because they didn't want to say it did, right? So there's a big resistance against that. But there were still studies that showed it did, right? So they finally convinced themselves, I think it started in Japan, that if we attenuate the pertussis, that's the small a in DTaP, attenuated pertussis. If we attenuate it, it will be safer. Okay, so they started doing that. And yeah, so there's less neurological damage with the DTaP. But the thing is, its protection is very weak. And there was a Dr. Cherry that wrote about this. I have the quote somewhere in here. Not that long ago, and he right in his paper. This is like the world's expert on pertussis and pertussis immunization, and he said, "Well, oops." Well, he didn't say oops. I'm saying oops. He said, "Oops." The attenuated pertussis has a very weak response, and so after 3 years, it doesn't have any effect at all. So he recommends that adolescents and adults get the Tdap, which is we'll just call it DTaP, vaccine every 3 years for the rest of your life. So now he's recommending we should get the DTaP every 3 years for the rest of our lives. So that doesn't sound very effective to me. And why did that happen? It's something called original antigenic sin. This is kind of the terminology they used, is when you inject yourself with this DTaP, you program your immune response in your lungs one way, and it stays that way. And you can't reverse it. You've programmed your immune system to behave a particular way. When you inhale a bacteria, your local immune system in your lungs goes, oops, that shouldn't be there. And it does a local immune response, and you cough it out. And you're pretty much all set for life. By injecting it in there, you create this very weak immune response. And so you really don't cough it out. It doesn't really work well. So you have a very sickly immune response. And now, since you're programmed for life the wrong way, you should get the DTaP for the rest of your life. I know it's hard pill to swallow, so to
Wow.
speak. Actually, I'm sure I have that quote here somewhere.
It just feels like we're all kind of like it's like the whole thing is big experiment like that's been done on people for years and years, decades.
Right. You know what? I should just go to my. Substack article. All right, so this is what I was talking about. The vaccine mistake nobody talks about, right? So this
Can
is
you
from the
zoom it a little bit? Hmm. Yeah, thank you.
okay. So how DTaP may have misprogrammed the generation's immune systems, right? Okay, so we'll just skip ahead. So this is what I'm talking about: original antigenic sin, right?
Uh-huh.
So this is the idea that you have an immune memory, right? So that when you program it one way, it will stay that way, right? Does that make sense so far?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Dr. Cherry, and he's talking about this ACT Act, right? Um, the antibody response is very blunted. So it's very similar to original antigenic sin. They gave it a different name, but basically it's the same thing. So what he was saying in that paper is because of this linked epitome suppression, which is original antigenic sin. So that's this thing here, right? All children who are primed by DTaP will be more susceptible to whooping cough throughout their lifetimes. And there is no easy way to decrease this increased lifetime susceptibility.
Oh,
Okay.
wow. DTaP
So,
is diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough. Is that the
yeah,
one?
right. The little a is attenuated and the P is pertussis.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. My
So,
kids got it. My kids are vaccinated from
right.
all these three. They
Yeah,
got them
sure.
all in a bundle.
Right. So, instead of saying, hey, there's a major flaw, we made a real screw up, they just basically, he's saying you should get DTaP every 3 years for the rest of your life. And no one should take my word for this. You can go to my Substack article over here, right? And then at the bottom, there's the paper, the 112-year odyssey of pertussis and pertussis vaccines, mistakes made, implications for the future. And that speaks to it's an experiment on the public because they
Yeah.
don't know how this stuff is going to work. They have to give it to the public and then see what happens over decades.
Oh
And,
God.
and so
This
you
there
can
is
go over, you can go
on
to
our
this link. Let's see if this link works. Oh, good. It still works.
zoom it a little
Um,
bit. Yeah.
yeah, well, it's a whole paper you
This
have
is
to
the
read.
original paper, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Journal of
Uh-huh.
Pediatric Infectious Disease Society. So it's not,
So
it's
this is
not in,
new. This is 2019. It means the children have been it's not like an old information. It's happening right now. They're
yeah, right,
vaccinating
right,
it
right.
right now
Sure,
with
sure.
these vaccines.
Yeah, right. So again, the idea is because of this linked epitope suppression, which is this misprogramming of the immune system, right? Everybody who got DTaP will be more susceptible to whooping cough throughout their lifetimes. And there's no way to decrease this susceptibility.
Oh
So,
my God. This is
yeah,
criminal. This is criminal. Why are they not
well,
stopping it? And why are they not b- people are being
because
sent to jail?
historically they can do whatever they want. They basically get to do whatever they want. If they make a mistake, they don't admit they made a mistake. They simply change what they're going to do. So if you look at the current schedule for DTaP or TDAP, I think it's every 10 years. They recommend everybody get it for every 10 years. I could be wrong about that because I don't keep track of what the latest stuff is. But I encourage everybody to just read this short article, and you could say, well, Roman's full of crap, so just don't pay attention to him. But then go read this paper, download it, read it, study it, and then take it to your doctor or pediatrician and say, hey, what about this? And
Ooh,
they'll probably never have heard of it because they're not told about this either. Right. So they're not
yeah.
told about
But
it either.
starting a conversation, it's like vaccination is like a religion, right? Like I
Yeah.
remember I grew up religious, and every single time when I would ask a question or show that I am not even being suspicious, but I'm just questioning certain things, I would get a lot of like there would be anger, like, "Ooh, you cannot question. If you are
Sure.
hesitating, you're gonna go to hell. You can't even question. You can't even hesitate." It's the same but worse. It's worse. If you even question the mood and the attitude of doctors or people are gonna change so fast. It's like you're gonna
This
become
right,
the
right, right.
hated
But
person right away.
this is nothing new. As soon as vaccination was, basically started, which is 1798, by 1800 it was already embedded into the culture, and lots of people were making money. And if you challenged it, you were sidelined. And throughout the 1800s, if you questioned it, you were called a crank, and then you would lose your position in society and you would lose your profits from vaccination. And this happened to many, many doctors over the decades. Even the smartest doctors around, if you questioned it, it doesn't matter what your position was in a university or anything. You were trash. You were trashed. You were gone. You were considered like an idiot automatically. So
Look,
you couldn't even question it.
I understand if they're doing something for money when something is not effective and they just want to, make money, right? But these are harmful. They're like harming
The,
people.
the, the original vaccine was extremely harmful. The original inoculation was harmful. You had a 1 to 3% mortality rate from this, taking smallpox from somebody and scratching it on their arm. You could die very easily because why? You're scratching pus into somebody's bloodstream, right? Same thing with vaccines. People were injured, people were killed, people ended up with tuberculosis, but it didn't stop it. People died from bleeding, people died from mercury, people died from arsenic, but it didn't stop it because it attained a level of ideology, right? So as a layperson, you're like, well, it's a doctor, so it must be correct. So this idea has been embedded, and even now we have medical error killing people, but nothing happens because it's, well, doctors are doing the best they can, and scientists are doing the best they can. So it's this attitude.
But when people are being harmed because of diphtheria, this is DTaP, which is children are being vaccinated right now.
Yeah,
Um, Little children, very little children. My oldest, he had the worst reaction to the same vaccine. He was like
to
a 3 months old. 3 months
to
old.
DTaP,
Um, yeah,
or
the
usually
DTaP.
get a whole bunch of different things at the same time.
We
So
call it different. Like we got it in my in Uzbekistan. So it was, I think there were 4 vaccines in a bundle, and he was 3 months old, and we knew nothing, and the doctors were not only just advising, they were like putting a pressure on us, and we were like,
sure,
well, he's so tiny, maybe. Well, we knew nothing, but we were like just questioning it a little bit because, oh, he's just so small, like 4 vaccines right now in one day,
yeah, yeah,
which is
yeah,
completely normal logical question. And they were really putting a pressure on us, and we were young, and we were like, well, okay,
sure,
if they say. And there's so many people they get vaccines like that way, and
sure.
they're doing it now. There seems like a malicious intent behind it, because why else wouldn't they stop doing something, even if it's for money? As
Well,
I said, if it was something just not
I,
effective but not harmful, and
it,
they're just gaining money, it's still bad, but
there,
I would be like, okay. But people are literally being harmed and dying, and they're getting away just using programming, right? They're programming people.
again, it's 300 years of this idea, 300 years, and when it didn't work, they just ignored it, or they said it's the patient's fault. And anybody who challenged it in the 1800s, you would lose your reputation, you would lose your profits, you know, you would lose everything. So it was a very risky thing to do, and anybody who did ended up basically a nobody, right? So that's what happened to Charles Crichton and a bunch of other guys, right? So this, and also the government got involved. They got people in the various parliaments to pass laws for compulsory vaccination. So through the middle of the 1800s, you had to get a smallpox vaccine by the time you were 3 months of age. That was the law. So you had the societal belief. You had doctors who were making profit this. It was their status symbol. And then you had the government saying you have to do it. And that went on for decades until 1885 when Leicester rebelled against it and they stopped this compulsory vaccination. But it rose up from the people. It didn't come from the top down. The top down was more than happy to continue it for eternity. That's the way
In
it
all
works.
aspects of life, in all topics, in all
Yeah,
situations, it
right,
always has to be from down to
right.
above.
In
Otherwise,
the beginning, it was the profession itself, and then later on, they got the legislature involved. So the 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 profession, based on their societal standing, allowed this to occur. And again, 1805, you had people writing about that the vaccine wasn't working. Hey, I vaccinated 1,200 people. This is one guy. I vaccinated 1,200 people, and I found out, well, it's not working. And he wrote a paper about it. And there was another guy in 1810 who wrote a paper saying, hey, yeah, it causes injury and death. This is not good. Didn't matter because the majority kept doing it, and they didn't want to hear about it. Right? It's somewhat human nature. It's like you don't want to hear that what you were doing is dangerous and killing people. You don't want to hear that. Plus, you're making money. Plus, if you say something, you're going to lose your social standing. So most people just keep quiet or don't even notice anything is going wrong because they don't want to see it.
but for a regular public, for us, for humans, it's not very natural to. I think like if you are in your natural normal state, you would questioning, being curious and seeking logic is always normal state for humans. And I
Yeah,
think when this is lacking or absent, it means there's some kind of like a conditioning and programming
sure.
happened.
Again,
Like
yeah, in this case, it's a 300-year conditioning system. Not easy to overcome.
when I see people's reaction when people are extremely aggressive, or when I see this anger, like calling people anti-vaxxers and whatever happened during the pandemic, it just clearly shows that people are brainwashed. Because I think if you are not brainwashed, you would be annoyed when you hear somebody expressing different opinion, but you would not experience hate. Because I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
hate requires a lot of energy.
Hate is fear based, right? So
True, but
this
where is
this
the fear coming from? Because fear
the fear
is
is the fear of the microbe, and the fear is if you don't take the magic shot, you are part of the problem, and you will kill people, and you're a bad person. So
okay,
that's why the
but
people get angry.
fear needs to be active. So fear needs to be something that you see. Like I maybe I'm abnormal, but I don't experience fear unless I see it in my immediate vicinity. Like if I
Well,
don't hear it, it's fear. It's like
well, I understand that, but there's also the mass media, right? So I'll give you another example. During the Gulf War, 2000, right? Um, People here in the United States were terrified that they were going to be beheaded, that some Muslims were going to go around and start chopping people's heads off, which was ridiculous. But this is people get these fear things in their head that they don't actually experience, so they're afraid of it. They get terrified of it. So
even
that's
if
just a different example. You
even if
didn't.
you go outside and don't see it, how does I just, yeah, I don't get it. I
People are
don't
afraid of the things that they can't see more often than not.
really.
So when you get in your car, 30,000 people or so die every year in cars, but people still drive cars. But you
Yeah.
say, hey, go swim in the ocean. Well, there could be a shark. I'm afraid of sharks, for sharks could kill me. That's like in the United States, like 1 every 2 years of people get killed by sharks. It's like almost never happens. So people might be afraid of a shark, which is highly unlikely that anything is ever going to happen, but you're okay with driving. That's fine. Or going to the hospital. You have 250,000 people a year dying from medical error. That's fine. I got to go to the hospital. People don't think about that. It depends on what's in your consciousness.
yes, so I call it brainwashing. I think like
You
I
can
don't know,
call it
maybe
that,
there's
sure.
a better word, but I think it's brainwashing. I think it's
Yep. People
being
don't
brain.
react on based on actual risk. They go on their perceptions, right? So if you look at the actual risk, it's like, oh, that's not a big deal. It's like that's not going to happen. But you have this primal fear, your fear of the unknown, fear of microbes. Fear of microbes has been embedded for centuries, a lot of time. The unknown mystery, you can't see it, so it can kill you at any minute. It could be lurking behind that bush. Boom.
I never had that fear. That's why it's
Well, a
so
lot of
difficult
people do.
to resonate. It's so difficult for me
Yeah,
to
when I
even.
was in the '70s, they would call hypochondria, being afraid, is hypochondriac, right? That was like a very like considered like a mental problem. But now it's like everybody's a hypochondriac. They're afraid of
Wait,
everything.
what is hypochondriac?
You're just afraid of like getting sick,
Oh,
basically,
really?
right?
Okay. I
Of
heard about
diseases.
germaphobes, like
Yeah, it's
germaphobe.
same thing. So in the '70s, germaphobes were considered a little kooky, right? Walking around turning door handles with a napkin or something, right? So you're all freaked out about every little germ, right? Now it's considered normal. If you're not a germaphobe, you're abnormal. So, and that's because of the COVID. Really, it scared the crap out of
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah. What do you think about the COVID vaccines, by the way? Have you looked into it?
Not really. I mean, I think the whole premise of protecting yourself from a microbe is ridiculous. It's not the best thing to do. The
Wait,
best thing
wait,
to
wait.
do is make. I'm sorry.
Are
What?
you differentiating between like microbe, virus? Is virus also a microbe?
When I say microbe, it's any kind of pathogen,
So it's a
microbe,
virus as
yeah,
well.
bacteria, virus, that type of thing. That's usually those two type of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, do you need to protect yourselves from those things? Not really.
So you say you wouldn't take any vaccines at all, even for
My
traveling?
personally, no, I would never take anything like that because from my personal experiences, my reading, it's if you're a healthy person, you really don't need these things, or in fact, almost any medical intervention is not necessary.
What I
Optimal health means you live your life, you eat right, you exercise, you get plenty of sunshine, you're not in a state of fear. All these types of things give you the ability to be a vibrant, healthy human being, which I think I am.
I, d- I don't know if you have noticed, but there has been a lot of recently posts on Facebook mainly about measles, new measles outbreak in the UK. Have you
Right.
heard about that? There is a lot. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
actually an outbreak, but the outbreak of posts about
Sure.
the measles and a lot of people. So somebody, a child, I think, died of apparently measles, and
Yeah.
now there's a lot of and posts saying, "Oh, the parents of this
Sure.
baby."
That's
Yeah. And one of the comments I read was somebody said, yeah, go get the measles vaccine because her daughter, she had measles when she was a child, and something happened to her eardrums because of measles, and now she has this disability.
right. Right.
So what do you think about situations like this when there are some consequences, not necessarily death, but such
Right.
severe
So
injury?
there's always a consequence of doing something and not doing something, right? So in the case when somebody says they have measles, right? What is the health state of that person, right?
As
So
a
like in tech,
child,
yeah, yeah. So
it's a
right.
baby.
So yeah, well, I don't know about that particular case, but in Texas there was a child. I don't know how old the child was, but when they looked at what the case was, the case went through a whole series of medical mishaps and giving the kid horrible nutrition, and things spiraled out of control. But then it gets labeled as a measles death, but not the overall occurrence of what happened to the person. Just like in the 17 1800s and early 1900s, if you did whatever procedure you wanted, you bled them, you gave them mercury, hot regimen, the person always died from the disease. They didn't die from the treatment.
So you think
And
there probably
and
could
they
be
and they
something else?
never die. And the way we write statistics is, oh, he was vitamin D deficient. You don't. No one dies from vitamin D deficiency because we don't look at it that way.
What?
It's a
How
matter of how
about
you look
polio?
at it.
One of the very strong cases for vaccines is poliomyelitis, I think.
Very low mortality rate, by the way.
But the injuries can be lifelong injuries.
Well, so yeah, so that's a more complicated history, right? So where to start? Okay, so in the late 1800s, early 1900s, polio was. Let's go back a little farther. Late 1800s, there wasn't a lot of this kind of paralysis, right? This infantile paralysis, they would call it. But later 1800s, early 1900s, there were more cases of this infantile paralysis. And what they found is it was very kind of distributed all over the place. It wasn't like in a city center where it was just spreading and everybody was getting it. So it was spread around, is very kind of sparse. Okay. It also was tied to the seasons. So it was dramatically higher in the summer and vanished in the winter. So I have charts that show that from the 1930s. So you have this big peak around July, and it dropped off until you got into later in the year and went to zero. So you have to say, well, that's a very bizarre kind of situation. And what you found is they were using various things to control pesticide, pests, and they're using lead arsenate to spray the apples because of coddling moth. And so, when would you be spraying all this stuff? You would be spraying it during the summer, spring and summer and fall.
Because of insects are
Right,
mainly at the
right.
time.
So,
Mhm.
depending on how much, and they wouldn't initially clean off these apples. I'm just using apples as an example, right? So you had a greater incidence, a lot greater incidence of this paralysis, which was distributed all over the place during the summer months. So there was people that recognized that and said, well, this is behaving more like a toxin than it is some kind of virus. I'm letting you kind of like assimilate this information. I
So
probably have I have some charts on this. I should just get to it. I think I
wait,
do.
so you think that it's actually not a polio virus? It's
Well, I'm not saying
like
that yet.
a
I think I
toxic
need to supply more
spray,
info.
which is what is it called? One of those, what is it? Glyphosates, pesticide. So it's like a pest.
Yeah, it was a pesticide, right? Darn. Here's the classic thing you see, right? This guy, poor little kid, he's got the braces, right? Yeah, and this is kind of interesting by Dr. Klenner. He mentioned that, why are we focused on this? Because we can see it. So in this particular case, he's talking about rheumatic fever, which was much worse than polio, but we don't ever talk about rheumatic fever. Rheumatic fever is like not something we even talk about that caused heart damage. Um, but because you see it, and it's like, oh, that's bad. But if it's rheumatic fever, you wouldn't have noticed it. So there's no people crippled from rheumatic fever that you can see with braces and things of that nature. Anyway, that's just a particularly interesting quote. So this is kind of like people fleeing in 1916, the dreadful infantile paralysis, right? So, you get the societal fear that everybody's like afraid of it. So here's the charts I was talking about. So 1916, 1931, where you get the big spike up in August and it tapers off. So this closely looks more like food poisoning or typhoid than it does a particular virus. Does that make sense to you?
But flu is also seasonal.
Yeah, but that ends up supposedly because you're in the winter, right? You're all confined together. This
Oh.
happened in the summer.
So it's flu is because you are confined in a small spaces.
That's
That's
what
why.
they say, right? I think it has a lot more to do with vitamin D levels than anything else.
Oh, okay. But this one is okay. So what if it's a virus that is more potent when it's hot?
Well, no one's ever claimed that in the literature. They just simply said there was a virus, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So is there
Um,
anything that indicates that it could have been pesticides instead of? But wait, so
well, we know that I thought I had a picture there. There's lead arsenate being sprayed. So we know that this can cause paralysis. We know that lead can do this. So there's
Hmm.
various toxins that can cause paralysis. And another interesting thing is when this was occurring, polio supposedly was just a human virus, but when they were spraying this stuff around, you would have different animals, horses, dogs, also exhibiting paralysis around the same time.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and the other thing is, so people wrote about that this was not infectious, right? So here's a quote from 1938. It's definitely not highly infectious. Until recently, cases were nursed from the start. In general wards and general hospitals, there's been no authenticated cases of infection of contacts. So it
Ooh.
wasn't spreading everywhere. It wasn't spreading in cities, for example. It was
So
just kind of cases all over the place.
so this is about poliomyelitis. So this polio, they're saying that it's not infectious,
That's what this particular doctor is saying, right?
but we're not denying that there is a virus called poliomyelitis that causes paralysis.
Oh, no, I'm not denying
There is
that
such a
necessarily.
virus.
Well,
Okay.
there's other supposed viruses that do the same thing.
What is it called?
Well, well, we'll get to that in a second. So I want to see this other quote. Oops. So this particular MD 1950, there's never been a doctor, intern, nurse, or any other member of the personnel who contracted polio, which means
Uh-huh.
paralysis, within a
Oh,
period of 35 years, nor has any patient ever developed polio after admission to the hospital. So here
okay.
they're saying, and this particular MD is saying from observations, no one's catching this. Because that's always the idea that you need to get this, you need to be vaccinated to protect everybody else, right? This opens up a bunch of questioning more than anything else. Is that like is that hurting you or your brain? It hurt my brain when I first read it.
No, I'm just trying to figure out like how does this virus go to I'm sorry, I lost my English. How
Yeah,
do
yeah.
you catch
I
it?
think you're locked in that like we
How does
talked about earlier. You're locked in, which is this is the way I used to be too. So, and maybe you'll still stay that way. Maybe this won't make sense to you, but it's still there's a virus, and you catch the virus and you get sick, and that's all there is to it. It's a single virus, single disease. You're done. This is the basis of vaccination. But what I'm trying to show here, there's other parts of the story that you don't know.
Mhm.
For example, the peak in the summer, and now that these doctors are quoting that it's not contagious.
Interesting. Hmm.
So there could be more than one cause of all these types of things.
And they then misdiagnosis. They're
Well,
diagnosing with
how
the
do you diagnose something back in the 30s and 40s? And you did it by how you particularly looked, right? It
yes,
was not by observation. You didn't do it by blood tests and things like that, right?
yes. So
Mm-hmm.
it could have been anything, any of these. Mhm.
Yeah. So here's the lead arsenate, which looks like the same thing. It looks like polio. You get paralyzed, right? I don't know how much. Oh, okay. Here's a chart where they're showing dogs, cats, pigs, chickens. They were getting paralyzed too. They were reported as paralysis during the early 1900s,
Mhm.
which tied to the spraying of this stuff all over the place. Um, so just based on epidemiology in 1938, it appears that polio is not caused by a living microorganism or a virus, but by a toxin.
Wow.
This is based on his observations, right?
Yeah.
Again, polio was like this incidence was very, very low. And the reason you don't know about it because there was a big mass media campaign showing these things. So you can see measles at the top was high, and even syphilis, syphilis was quite high. See this line here? This is syphilis. That's another
In
disease. Do you hear about syphilis in the United States?
I don't even know. I mean, I heard randomly
Yeah,
about
but
it, but I have
but
no clue
but
what.
see how high syphilis, how many cases of syphilis there were? There was lots, but we don't hear about it anymore. We don't have a vaccine for syphilis, by the way.
So it kind of
Yeah, I
muted
know. I
itself out, or we
well,
just became more immune to it.
probably just like everything else. As things got better, it's less likely to be a problem.
Right.
Um,
But then we have other diseases that replaced these diseases,
well, as
like
far as
diabetes.
infectious, well, that's a different matter altogether. Yeah, sure.
Oh,
Diabetes, heart disease, and these types of things
yeah,
have increased over
cancer.
the decades,
Yeah.
especially since probably the 1970s, 1980s. Our diet has gone way down really hard, really horrible. That's why we have an obesity epidemic. We have a vitamin D epidemic, which nobody ever talks about. People have very low vitamin D levels generally. They're obese. There's a lot of health problems going on, and it, we the media tends to focus on measles, right? At the same time, you have hundreds of thousands of people dying from diabetes and heart disease and stroke. And what are those? Those are lifestyle diseases. But our whole business model is based on McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts and Coca Cola. Those are okay. Those are fine. Eat as many as you want, but those are the things that are causing some of the problem.
So back then, the problem was sanitation, and poor sanitation and poor oral health, nutrition caused certain
When
diseases
you
to
you're saying
skyrocket.
or I'm saying overall health, not oral. Like oral would mean mouth.
No, no, no. Sorry, oral, my pronunciation.
No, that's
But
okay. I just want to clarify.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But now, these conditions have been cleared, but then other conditions are creating diseases. So it means that depending where you are in this evolution, then you have different diseases that we create ourselves.
Well,
Poor
most right,
sanitation, and then now
right,
poor lifestyle.
right. That's what I
So every
contend.
generation has their own diseases, different
Well,
caused by
they're right.
sanitation.
They're caused by ideology, right? So back in the 1800s, if you're living in London in squalor, everybody else is living in squalor around you. You look around, everybody's living like that. So you don't think that's abnormal, but it's an
Mhm.
abnormal way to live,
Okay, yeah.
right?
Interesting.
And then
Yeah.
by 1950, if you look at pictures from 1950, 1960, 1970, almost everybody was thin and relatively fit. But
Mhm.
now it's now in 20 whatever year it is, 2025, obesity is like everywhere. And people who are pale and don't get any sunshine, that's very common too. It's a big health disaster, but we don't focus on that. Not really. We focus on the microbe. The microbe is going to get you. The microbe's going to get you,
Mhm.
which is absurd because the probably the most likely cause of death for any particular individual is heart disease, stroke, cancer, or medical error. Those are your big biggies, but we don't talk about those really. We don't focus on that because that's personal
Mhm.
responsibility, personal, except for dumb interventions like Ozempic or stomach stapling. Basically it's all under your control, and we don't like to do that. We don't want to take care of ourselves in general.
Yeah. So
Here's
what does
another important point that Dr. Greenberg made in 1960. So when you can change the definition of what something is, right? And then by doing that, you've created a whole new classification of disease, right? But if you just change the definition underneath, in this case, polio, right? By changing the definition, boom, you've changed the incidence of something occurring. So here he's talking about the so they used to have it so it was every Is this the right quote? I think it is. I don't know if that's exactly the right quote, but prior to the vaccine, if you had a paralysis within second, you were still paralyzed 24 hours later, that was considered polio. After the vaccine, it had to be 60 days, which I thought this was the quote. Maybe not. Yeah, there it is. Okay, sorry. So they changed the definition that you had to be paralyzed 60 days later in order to call it polio. Whereas initially it was, are you still paralyzed after 24 hours? So you've created a whole brand new disease classification. So your paralysis now has changed. Does that make sense? Am I explaining this correctly?
So before the vaccines, if somebody was paralyzed for 24 hours, it would be classified as polio.
Polio.
But
After it was 60 days later.
but why did they do that?
Oh, well, I'm not sure why they did it, but it certainly decreased the incidence of polio
Oh,
automatically.
oh, because somebody would just, but the paralysis would go away.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
As a matter of fact, I don't know if I have that in these slides here. No, I don't have it. So there was a lady, Dr. Kenny. No, she wasn't a doctor. She was Sister Kenny. And she thought what the doctors of the day were doing, which were basically immobilizing your limbs. So they would immobilize your limbs in casts, or they would do operations to your limbs. So they might like immobilize your limbs for months or a year. And of course, when you were done and you try to walk again, your muscles were destroyed. So you were ended up in some kind of those little metal restraints because you were damaged by the procedure. Okay, so this is what they were doing. They were cutting tendons, and then they were purposely straightening out limbs and immobilizing them, thinking this was a good idea. Sister Kenny said, "No, that's a bad idea. We're not going to do that." They actually ended up having a Sister Kenny clinic, and they actually made a movie about her back in the 50s. And so she said, "No, this is not what we're going to do. We're going to." She said, "We're going to use hot packs and massage," and she had a remarkable rate of cures. So the people that were previously destined to be paralyzed for life or have some kind of serious problem, she was able to cure, Sister Kenny. So there's a lot more to the story than we've been told.
Interesting. Here it says that
Oh,
can we go back? There isn't a doctor in this room who hasn't seen a case of frank paralytic polio which has not recovered within 60 days.
interesting, huh?
Doctor in this room who hasn't seen. Well, wait, what does this mean? It
Well,
recovered sufficiently.
again, they changed the definition. They insist on the 60-day paralysis, and he thought it was silly. It's ridiculous.
Wait, so it could have been polio. So the
But
polio cases can
it,
be fixed.
it depends on what your definition of polio is. What's your definition of polio? Is it just that you're paralyzed or not paralyzed? It's easy to get trapped into thinking it's only about a microbe,
Uh-huh.
right? And there were other microbes. I don't have that in these slides. There's other microbes which I can't recall the type. So when they went to look in the 1950s at, I think it was in Michigan, they used their techniques to look at various cases, and they found that a small percentage had polio virus. Other ones, which like Coxsackie virus, I think was another one. There was a couple other viruses that were found in these cases, and in many cases there was no virus at all found. I don't think I have that in here. Sorry, I didn't finish all these slides for this section. Yeah. So 1958, they went to check, right? So we can see polio virus was in 292 cases, echovirus 100, Coxsackie virus 73, and no virus 404, 401. So when they actually went to look, not everything was about this polio virus, right?
Uh-huh. What's the ecovirus? Is
That's
it a
another
real?
thing that supposedly can cause paralysis as well. So,
Oh, okay. And the same with Coxsackie virus.
right,
It's also
right, right,
possible.
right,
It's very
right.
similar looking symptoms. And
Yep.
then, wait, so does that mean there were 401 cases where it caused very similar symptoms, but it was not a virus?
This
Is
is
that
what
what that
they
means?
when they did the fecal specimens, right? This is what they found, right?
So, but these patients, they had shown similar to polio
Yeah, I believe
symptoms,
so. I haven't
but
looked at
no
this. I haven't looked at
no
this
virus.
particular part of the slides like in 20 years,
Mm.
so I don't recall exactly the cases.
Okay. Well, that means that if half of the situation is there's no virus found
Well,
in
this is
the
what they right. This is what they found in the fecal samples. I think there's another one.
I mean, if
Uh,
they're doing this chart, I think that's what it should mean, that they all had very similar looking symptoms, but half of
right.
them turned out to be no virus. And but the other half was polio, right? I think like
Yeah, it was
what
a
is
part of it.
one third, one third of it, I think.
Right. So here's doing antibody, right? So they're looking for antibody changes, right? So you can see
Mhm.
here when they're actually measuring the blood of
Yeah.
191 patients, 48 showed polio, 14 echo, six Coxsackie, but a lot of them, the majority, showed no antibody changes.
Okay.
Same. So they're trying to determine. So if it's just about the polio virus, this should have been 100%. So they weren't finding that.
Hmm. Okay. So this means that there is polio virus. But what I learned just now is there is a polio virus. It is real, but we don't know how how you get it, right? Doctors, we see the doctors saying that nobody got it in the hospitals, no
Yeah.
medical staff got it. So we don't know how it's transmitted.
Right.
Was it
Right.
airborne or is it
Again, in
um
my humble opinion, is we're always looking at the microbe and not the health of the people. So what was the nutritional status of these various people? We don't know because we don't look at that, right? So like in the case of measles, if you're vitamin A and vitamin C deficient, like if you go to poor countries where their sanitation's horrible and all that stuff and their nutrition's low, they're much more likely to die from measles, like tremendously more than anybody here. So we're not looking at the overall health of a people. We're always looking only at the microbe. It's just microbe focused. It's
mm,
it's germophobia. And again, this has been for centuries. So back in the 1600s, people would go aboard a ship, and then over a period of time, their teeth would get loose and they would limbs turn black. And they thought there was a contagion that was spreading scurvy. We found out later it was a vitamin C deficiency, right?
interesting.
And then there
Okay.
was another disease called beriberi, where people would look like it was something spreading around, and people were convinced there was a virus, but that was a vitamin B deficiency. And then there was another disease called pellagra, where you would get these rashes, and it looked like some kind of infectious agent spreading around. It turned out that's another vitamin B deficiency. So, we tend to the first inclination is to think contagion and virus. This has been going on for centuries. That's the first thought process, and that's the thing that sticks first. What
Hmm.
we don't typically look at the nutrition or other factors. It's always about microbe disease.
Yeah, this is very important message because I think this is how I mean it's so interesting because it's not about the well-being of a human. Even during COVID, they were trying to suppress very hard all these vitamin D conversations. They were trying
Right.
to take the spotlight away from the health and overall health, but
Right.
more into fear mongering and then into coercing people getting the vaccines. And like, even if you go, for example, in Germany, there is like a public insurance doesn't pay you for checking your vitamin levels. It's like
No.
it's so important. It's like the core, it's the fundamentals. You have to pay. The first thing you have to do is check vitamin levels, and you have to pay for it. But you have
Yeah.
to pay for it yourself. And
It goes beyond that. So this
they will pay for medicines, they will pay for all sorts of like chemical treatments, everything
yeah,
else, blood tests, but they don't check your vitamin levels, which is
yeah.
like seems like a fundamentals. And again, now you're saying that the all these viruses and pathogens and microbes, it's important, your vitamin levels are important. But even
It's it,
today,
it's not
it's
only
not.
that. So there was a doctor in 1880, Dr. Henry Littlejohn. He was a sanitary inspector at hospitals. So they went in to make sure everything was nice and clean and taken care of in hospitals. He had a team. He did this for 25 years. And he wrote, and he concluded after all that time, based on his personal observations, is if you were not afraid, because you couldn't be afraid to be a sanitary inspector because you were exposed to scarlet fever, measles, whooping cough, all these types of flus, everything. And he found if you weren't scared, that none of his staff ever got sick, and none of his the family members of the staff ever got sick. And he concluded if you're afraid, that's how you get sick. If you weren't afraid, you
Interesting, right?
didn't.
Because this is something you cannot put a finger on, because you can check your vitamin B levels and you can
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, number here. But like your level of fear, you cannot check. It's like
No, there's no
ambiguous,
test for that. Right,
you
right.
don't
But
know.
you know how you feel when you're afraid, right? It makes
Absolutely.
you feel like you're going to, well, you feel horrible. Your whole system goes crunches down. And we do
Exactly.
know when you're afraid, your whole immune system goes to basically zero
And
because it's designed to protect you. Like if a bear pops out and is going to kill you, or a lion or something, right? You need to go focus on running away, not fighting microbes, right? But if you do that all the time, what happens? It not only destroys you mentally, it destroys your whole health profile, and you tend to just curl up and die, right? And even if you don't die, you're not eating healthy, you're eating junk, you're not exercising, you're not going out in the sunshine, you're hiding, you're terrified, on and on and on. And I think a lot of the things we did over COVID scared people to the point that they died from one thing or another.
yeah, I think
So
like every
I think
single
it's go.
person
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think like every single person has an experience in the past that happened to them when they were afraid of something. It came back and found it. I have so many cases where I'm like, oh, I was like, oh, I hope this doesn't happen, and then it happens. I don't know how it works, but I know it's not something that we can prove or show or touch or feel, but we all know that it happens. We all
Sure.
know.
When you're
So
yeah you when you're afraid, you kind of make it happen, right? From your own
I had this
paranoia.
very weird, like crazy thing when I started learning how to cycle, how to ride on a bicycle.
hmm
If I saw like a garbage bins on the roads or like a poles, I would be like, just don't hit that, don't hit that, don't hit that. But somehow I don't know how, I cannot explain it, but I would directly go out of all the places and hit that garbage bin or that pole, and
Sure.
I would just fly off the bicycle. And I
Right.
didn't know how it worked because I was focusing so much on not hitting it. I would just go exactly to the center of it and I would hit it with a and I don't know, but I think this is works all the time when you're focusing and afraid of something, even if you're going directly you will just go directly and hit something that you're trying to avoid
Yeah.
because you're so much focusing on it.
No, that's I think that's true, and it wrecks your whole health. If you're afraid all the time, you're going to end up sick one way or another. It's not going to end well. Right? The longer it goes on, the worse it is. Momentary fear is the way it's supposed to be, not continuous, nonstop fear.
Yeah. Do you
So,
know
which is another
anything
thing. I think,
about? Yeah, go
yeah, I
ahead.
was going to add that I think this whole we've created this whole medical notion for everything, right? We're supposed to be afraid of everything instead of just simply living life and taking care of ourselves in a proper way. So that means eat properly, don't eat a bunch of garbage, junk food, exercise in some format, keep yourself moving, get plenty of sunshine, be out in nature, have good relationships, do positive things, have meaningful work, and then you live your life. Eventually you're going to die, and we don't like to think about that, but if you just live your life in a positive way, like most of these things aren't an issue. You don't need to go testing for everything. We've medicalized our lives. I call it part of the sickness industrial complex. So everything's medicalized. It's like, oh, you have to check this, you have to do that, you have to do. No, well, why? Why are you doing all these things? You're not living a life. You're living a sickness. And then the other part of this sickness industrial complex is industrial agriculture that reduces our mineral levels and vitamin levels. And then we have the big food industries, Coca Cola, which no one should drink, which I used to before I knew any better. Coca Cola, McDonald's, Doritos, these are all garbage foods. No one should be eating these things. So that, and then once you start getting obese and you go sick, you go seek medical help, and they put you on medications, and some of those medications deplete your magnesium levels, all sorts of things, and you end up in worse shape over and over and over again. And I think the key is to break away from the whole thing, and that's what I've done the last decade or
What
two.
what works really bad for brainwashing is this term. I think it's called everything in moderation.
Yeah,
Because I think it's very misinforming or misleading thing. Like, oh,
sure.
everything in moderation. You can eat a little bit Coca-Cola, or you can drink
Right, right, right.
the alcohol, or you can just do a little bit of hamburger. I don't know what's
Yeah, my mom told me
it
that once.
doesn't
I
it
said,
doesn't
"Oh,"
work.
I said, "Mom, what do you mean by moderation?" Well, just a little. Is it okay if I have a little heroin? And she's like, "Oh no, no, that doesn't count."
Yeah, I think this is what they're doing. This is one of those
Yeah,
methods that works. And another one is seeding doubt. Ever since when they time when seed doubt in people's heads, people try to go for easier and more satisfactory route than difficult route. So when they say, "Oh, maybe it's having Nutella or I don't know, whatever," it's okay if you eat a little bit. Or when they seed this hesitate doubt, people will not. We will be like, "Oh, okay, I will have it a little bit," or and then you will never have a little bit because I believe there's something in these foods that make you want to eat more and
sure.
more. Or maybe just
There,
it's
there,
sugar. Maybe it's sugar.
there's reason there's food scientists that design things to be addictive, right? From the
Pure,
packaging to what they put in the ingredients, right? They
yeah, like
want you to have
natural
more,
flavors. Yeah.
right? They want you to have more Doritos. Why? Because they're going to sell more, so they make it so it's addictive, right? Hey, so
You
so
can't have
when I
moderate.
when I grew yeah, when I grew up, McDonald's was like once or twice a year, okay, because you just didn't have it, or you had soda like Coca Cola at a birthday party or Christmas or something. It was very rare. Now it's like all the time.
Every
So
day.
when it was rare, okay, probably not a big deal. It wasn't the best idea, but it wasn't that horrible. But now it's like all the time. So people are consuming this garbage. It's not really food. It's like food like substances that no one should actually eat ever. But instead, it's like, well, I only have a Coca Cola once a day, or twice a day, three times a day. Well, what else am I going to wash down my Doritos with? Oh, well, it's only today and tomorrow and the next day. So that you get addicted to a bad lifestyle. And instead, you could say, hey, if I eat a whole foods diet and exercise and do all these things, suddenly you feel great. And then you don't have to worry about all these conditions and you can live a good life instead of like getting more dragged down and more tired and then going for stimulants. Oh, I need coffee. Maybe I should go to the doctor and get a scan and all this crap. Instead, just break away from the whole thing.
Yeah. What I have noticed also, when you eat clean and then when you see like junk food, it's gonna taste so strange. It's gonna taste so weird that you're not
Oh
gonna
yeah,
want
yeah.
it anymore. It's gonna be so,
Right,
I
from
can
personal
explain.
experience, when I started this, I would go back and have like a bagel, which is
And
considered pretty okay, but it's just a refined carb, and I would feel awful. Or one time we had a little party at my mom's house, and I hadn't had pizza in a long time, so I said, "Well, it's a big vegetable pizza. There's not a lot of cheese on it." I had that. I felt horrible for a whole day because I wasn't used to it.
yeah. And I think that people who, if you try even like for a week or maybe like a month, just eating clean food that is, that you see that is food, because that's what I tell my kids. There is this food, like I look at the packaging like thing, is
Yeah,
that, is it growing on a tree? Do you know how it's made? Where is it coming from? Okay, like flour, you can, you know, okay, we take the, I
sure.
don't know the English word, wheat, and then you know how flour is made. Okay, we know how sugar is made, more or less. Like, it's
Yeah,
processed, but no, honey. Okay, we know, but like, how do you know this? This in packages, cookies or donuts. What is
sure.
in it? Is it food? In my
Right.
mind, it's not
Well,
food because it
right,
doesn't
right,
grow.
right. I agree. So it's not that hard. I mean, it's people make it like it's a horrible, complicated, awful thing, but you can make whole foods. It's not that you get potatoes. I like organic potatoes, and you can bake it or boil it and smash it and add some coconut. I like coconut cream. Put that in there or whatever, and put salt and pepper and put lots of different herbs, and it comes out delicious. But you know what? It's easier to open a bag of potato chips and because they're addictive. If I open a bag of potato chips, which I haven't had in years, it's like, oh yeah, oh what happened to the bag? It's gone. You eat the whole thing. But you
But
can
I
have
also,
delicious food that makes you feel great, but it's not going to come in a package.
for sure, and also if you have been eating for a while clean food, your body, I think it's bacteria, your gut bacteria, that it changes, and then when you want this junk food, not only you don't want it, the taste is going to be weird. It's going to taste
Oh yeah,
horrible. And you, I mean, when I
yeah.
was eating clean and I would just look at a brownie and I would be like, oh, I always wanted it. I badly used to love brownies. And even like smelling it, oh, like I don't want it because your gut bacteria has changed and you only
Right,
now
right,
used
right.
to eating clean. So I think people shouldn't worry about having cravings. Like once you get over this difficult part of couple of weeks or months, different for people,
Sure.
then you're not gonna want to look like pizza. Ugh, it's gonna be so.
Yeah.
But if you've been eating it
I
every
I agree.
day,
Once you eat healthy, and I went to the gym 2 hours this morning. I feel great, and I had a bunch of vegetables and some hummus or and some like whole grain crackers for breakfast. I feel good. I feel great. And once you get to that state, you don't want to go backwards
no,
because
yeah.
then you feel lousy, right?
Also, what really is regretful is the fact that we stopped enjoying fruits or vegetables or any
Yeah.
kind of clean food. They're so delicious, but because we eat flavor enhanced foods, we, after eating like, let's say a donut or like a chocolate cake or donut or like Snicker bars or something, and then you eat an apple, you're not going to enjoy it. It's going to taste
No.
blunt and disgusting. You don't want an apple.
No,
But if
no, that's very common, right?
yeah,
It doesn't have those flavor enhancers. You're like, that's boring. I don't want that.
yeah, and
Right?
that's why when my kids do not eat any sweets, like I mean, they the normal jams and stuff, normal natural food, but they don't eat any kind of like flavor enhancing sweets and candies. And then when they eat apricot, watermelon, it's like, ooh, so this is so delicious. This is
Yeah.
amazing. And then they enjoy fruit more. It's the same with when they're exposed to screen or cartoons or shows. They don't want to read books,
Oh yeah.
obviously, but if they are don't have any didn't have any screen time, then they're hungry for books. So I think this also works for anything in life. You just need to starve yourself from, and then you're going to want
Yeah,
good
yeah.
natural
That's
things.
great. The other day, I just sliced off a big piece of watermelon and cubed it up, and that was my dessert. it's hydrating, it's filled with nutrients, and it's like delicious. It's like,
Yeah.
and then I look at a candy bar like, why would I want that?
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, internet addiction is another big societal problem because it's like next video, next video, next video. Oh, I can look at anything I want. I can play games all day long, and then you end up your whole mind is destroyed, your health is destroyed, and we're like, oh, that's fine. Just do as much as you want. It's okay. We're destroying whole generations with junk food and junk media and junk internet. Yeah, it's
Mm,
awful. And then we
mm,
go, oh, something's wrong with you. Go to the doctor. They'll give you some medication. Oh, maybe you're depressed because of all this crap. Oh, yeah, okay. And then you start taking antidepressants and you gain weight. And then you're like, oh, I can't lose the weight. And you try to go to the gym if you're lucky. And then, I don't want to do that. That's too much work. It just turns into a whole
vicious
big
cycle.
mess. Big mess. I was going to use a naughty word that I decided not to.
Yeah.
Big cluster F.
Yeah. I wanted so my last question is, do you have you looked into, because we all these diseases are something that is more um that happens in cities or in big country, like in metropolises, but have you looked into what happens with, what is it called, aborigines, like the people tribal people who live in away from this kind of world? I mean, I think they also get these viruses? Does it work?
So in our polio chapter, we talked about the Avanti Indians,
Uh-huh.
and so they didn't like outsiders, so they would kind of kill them. But 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 what they would do is they eventually went in there and they tested them for these viruses and stuff, and they didn't have words for these sicknesses, right? They were perfectly fine, but even though they had indications of polio virus, right? But they were fine. There was nothing. They didn't have any paralysis or anything else. So there are people that have looked at these kinds of things, and I think most of the time they find out they're just perfectly fine. They don't have these kind of modern problems.
And
So yeah. So
when they,
I don't have a lot of examples of that, but
yeah. It's just I'm thinking when the Spanish, I think they came to South America. I think there's the stories how they gave chicken pox, I think, and a lot of
yeah.
people
So
died. But weren't they wasn't their health in a good condition? Those native
yeah. So
people.
this so I there's a mystery which I have not solved. I
Uh-huh.
don't know what the answer is. So in the 1600s, there was a couple of doctors that were talking about if you treated smallpox well. Dr. Sydenham, he was considered the English Hippocrates, right? He said if you and he was talking to this Dr. Cole through letters, and he said if you treat smallpox properly, it's a mild disease. This is what he was saying, right? If you're not using the hot regimen and these heating cordials, smallpox is no big deal. And Dr. Cole agreed because he implemented that too. But most of the rest of the profession continued to use this hot regimen and these other types of procedures. So that was the first time I heard smallpox being a mild disease, which sounds crazy, right? So you think smallpox deadly, right? And then there was a couple other doctors throughout the 1800s that observed the same thing. They said if you treat smallpox properly, it's a mild disease, which
What does
seems again,
properly mean? Is what does properly mean? Is it with some kind of
well,
advanced?
don't do stupid medical things. If the
Okay, just
person's relatively healthy and you don't do bad medical procedures, they were fine. Okay. So, and then by the end of the 1800s, smallpox used to kill one. The statistics are one in five would kill. But then by the end of the 1800s into the early 1900s, it became a mild disease and it would be confused with chickenpox. So it declined in its lethality, just like measles and whooping cough and every other disease. Smallpox became a very mild disease. Okay. Which just sounds crazy, right? But this is what happened to all the diseases. But the mystery to me is, and I have never parsed through it and I haven't figured it out, maybe I never will, is when you read the history of Westerners coming to America or South America, that the indigenous population was wiped out by measles and measles and smallpox and that type of thing. So that makes it sound like it's a really lethal thing. So why is there a discrepancy between what various people experienced in the 16, 17, 1800s into the 2000 into 1900s, which they found that smallpox and all these other diseases were mild, but why was there this kind of disease spreading supposedly in these Aboriginal populations? I don't know the answer to that. And so I'm not really sure what happened there. Was it because this disease actually spread, or is it because they were giving them mercury, for example? I found in one case that they were giving mercury to the indigenous peoples in the 1800s, and that was probably, resulted in their deaths, because if you give too much, you're not going to do well, right? But so I don't know the answer to that. So I don't know. I wish somebody would figure it out for me.
Well, first of all, when history is written, it can be written in any way, right? So one of those things is when you
Sure.
can write whatever you want, and then another.
It's observation, and from your point of view.
Mm-hmm. Well, also people can deliberately write false information as a history, like we know.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you could go, if you wanted to, go slaughter a whole village and say, well, they died from a disease. Did that happen? I don't have any evidence of that. I'm saying that could happen.
Sort of like to have a better explanation why so many indigenous people disappeared.
Yeah. So what really happened there? I never explored it in any depth to any kind of satisfaction of myself. So
because if we think that all these viruses and microbes are not really of a risk to somebody who's healthy gut and is healthy, then I'm assuming that the indigenous people were quite healthy because because of their lifestyle.
Right. So there's a paradox in my mind. I don't know the answer. See, I don't know everything.
So either it's like
who does?
It's like a completely different like a virus that was completely unknown to them, or there's a different explanation to it.
I don't know what the answer is, and I started looking into it. The farther you go back in history, the worse the data is, right? So I don't know anything about that. I have books to read on the original explorers and what they wrote, but I haven't got around to it, and maybe I never will, because there's always so many things to do, right? So I wish somebody would solve that mystery for me, because I don't know what the answer is.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I also want to will share all your links, because you have books and it's amazing. It's so much research, and I think it's better for people to check them out on their own and then come to a conclusion.
Yeah, go to my Substack. If you go to my Substack, all the articles, everything's always going to be free. So all the articles are free. They're all fully referenced. So then you can look up the references. All the charts are there. All the pictures are there. All that stuff is there for free. You can go to dissolvingillusions.com as well if you want to pick up books, audiobook, etc. And all the charts are there too, and the photos. So you can get everything for free. You don't have to pay for anything if you don't want to. If you want to read the whole book, great. I think you kind of blow your mind, but the articles might be very helpful. And just read those and see if they make sense to you. If they don't, that's fine. It has to make sense to you. And check the references. There's tons of references for every article, so you can just look into it and then come to your own conclusion. Don't automatically. This is my advice after decades of doing this. Don't follow the herd. The herd is frequently wrong. But sometimes they're right, but a lot of times they're not.